Across 140 million miles of empty dark, a red world turns beneath a sky the color of dust and fading light. Mars hangs there, waiting, silent as a tombstone, beautiful as a promise. For generations, it has been humanity's obsession, our next frontier, the planet we have gazed at through telescopes and imagined walking upon. Elon Musk tells us we will stand on its surface by 2030. He speaks of cities, of colonies, of becoming a multiplanetary species. But he is wrong. Not because the dream is impossible, but because the reality is far stranger, far more dangerous, and infinitely more fascinating than any headline can capture. Tonight, we will journey not to Mars itself, but into the invisible forces that guard it. The physics that wait like predators in the silence. The chemistry that slowly erodes human tissue. The psychology that fractures even the strongest minds. These are not failures of engineering. They are fundamental truths written into the architecture of the universe itself. If you've ever wondered why, after decades of dreaming, we remain earthbound, the answer is not lack of ambition. It is the quiet, relentless hostility of another world. Mars does not welcome us. It tolerates no mistakes. And the obstacles standing between humanity and the red planet are not the ones you see in movies or read about in headlines. They are deeper, more patient, more deadly. There is the gravity, so weak it begins destroying bones and hearts within weeks, turning astronauts into fragile shells of themselves. There is the radiation, invisible streams of cosmic particles that slice through DNA like microscopic scalpels, raising cancer risks to terrifying levels. The atmosphere, barely there, yet somehow thick enough to create storms that can engulf the entire planet while offering no protection from the void above. Then there is the dust, not ordinary dust, but microscopic blades laced with toxic perchlorates, a substance that acts like asbestos and poison combined, infiltrating every surface, every seal, every breath. Beyond the physical dangers lies something even more insidious, the isolation. The knowledge that Earth is a tiny blue dot in the sky, that help is 20 minutes away at the speed of light, that every decision, every malfunction, every moment of doubt occurs in a bubble of silence so complete it can shatter sanity itself. This is not science fiction. This is the science of survival, and it is unforgiving. Yet we are drawn to Mars, drawn by something ancient and primal, the same restless curiosity that carried our ancestors across oceans and deserts, into mountains and tundra, chasing horizons simply because they existed. Mars represents not just exploration, but a question. Can we transcend our biology? Can we survive where we were never meant to live? The answer, as we will discover, is far more complex than yes or no. It is a meditation on limits, on human fragility, and on the cost of dreams measured in blood, treasure, and time. If you enjoy journeys like this, explorations into the hidden realities of space and science, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe. It helps us continue reaching further into the unknown together. And before we begin our descent into the beautiful nightmare of Mars colonization, share with us in the comments. Where are you watching from tonight? What time is it in your corner of the world? Are you drifting towards sleep or just beginning your day? We would love to know. Now, settle in. Let your thoughts quiet. And let us walk together through the red dream that haunts humanity, uncovering not why we should abandon it, but why reaching it demands far more than we ever imagined. Mars pulls at us with only 38% of Earth's gravity. At first glance, this seems almost liberating. Imagine jumping 3 times higher, carrying heavy equipment as if it were made of foam, moving across the rusty terrain with the effortless grace of an astronaut on the moon. It sounds like a superpower, a feature rather than a flaw. But gravity is not just the force that holds our feet to the ground. It is the invisible architect of every cell in our body, the constant pressure that has shaped every aspect of human biology across millions of years of evolution. Remove 2/3 of that force, and the human body doesn't adapt. It begins to dismantle itself, slowly, silently, and irreversibly. The first casualty is bone. On Earth, our skeleton is in constant conversation with gravity. Every step we take, every movement we make, sends signals through our bones that tell them to remain strong, to rebuild, to resist the crushing weight of existence. But on Mars, that conversation grows quiet, the signals weaken, and the bones begin to listen to a different instruction: dissolve. Astronauts on the International Space Station, floating in microgravity, lose bone density at a rate of 1 to 2% per month. This is roughly 12 times faster than osteoporosis on Earth, a disease that takes years to cripple the elderly. In space, it takes months. On Mars, with its fraction of Earth's gravity, the deterioration is slower than in orbit but still relentless. Within a year, a colonist's bones could become as fragile as those of an 80-year-old, brittle and prone to fractures from the simplest tasks. The spine compresses differently. Without the constant downward pull, the discs between vertebrae expand, causing chronic back pain that never fully resolves. The pelvis weakens. The femur, the strongest bone in the human body, becomes porous, filled with microscopic voids where calcium once existed. A fall that would bruise you on Earth could shatter your leg on Mars. And unlike on Earth, there are no emergency rooms, no orthopedic surgeons, no rehabilitation centers. A broken bone on Mars is not just an injury, it is a potential death sentence, a cascading failure in a hostile environment where mobility means survival. But bones are only the beginning. The cardiovascular system, that magnificent engine of blood and pressure, begins its own quiet rebellion against Martian gravity. On Earth, your heart works constantly against gravity to pump blood upward from your legs to your brain. It is a task so fundamental that we never notice it, yet it keeps our cardiovascular system strong and resilient. On Mars, the heart doesn't need to work as hard. The blood flows more easily. The heart rate slows. The muscle fibers thin. What seems like relief is actually atrophy. The heart is not resting. It is weakening. This creates a paradox so cruel it borders on tragic. The longer you stay on Mars, the less capable you become of ever returning to Earth. Astronauts who spend months in low gravity experience orthostatic intolerance when they return home. Standing up becomes a challenge. Blood pools in their legs. Their hearts struggle to pump against the suddenly overwhelming force of Earth's gravity. Some faint. Some experience dangerous drops in blood pressure. For someone who has spent years on Mars, the return to Earth could be fatal. Their cardiovascular system, having adapted to the gentler pull of the red planet, may simply fail when confronted with the demands of their home world. In this way, Mars doesn't just change you, it traps you. Perhaps even more disturbing is what happens above the neck. In low gravity, fluids in the body redistribute upward. Without the constant downward pull, blood and cerebrospinal fluid migrate toward the head and upper body. This creates what astronauts call puffy face, chicken legs syndrome. The face swells, the legs thin. It sounds cosmetic, even comical, but the consequences are anything but. The increased fluid pressure in the skull pushes against the back of the eyeballs, flattening them, distorting their shape. Vision blurs. Some astronauts have returned from space with permanent changes to their eyesight, requiring glasses for the first time in their lives. This condition, known as spaceflight-associated neuroocular syndrome, or SANS, affects nearly 2/3 of astronauts on long-duration missions. On Mars, where colonists would spend not months but years or even lifetimes, the damage could become irreversible. The first generation of Martian colonists may quite literally see their world differently, their eyes reshaped by the very planet they sought to call home. And then there is the question no one wants to ask, but everyone must. What about children? If Mars is to be more than a research outpost, if it is to become a true colony, then families must be possible. But pregnancy in low gravity is an unknown frontier, one shadowed by profound biological uncertainty. No human has ever been conceived, carried, or born beyond Earth's gravity. Animal studies offer troubling hints. Experiments with pregnant rats in simulated low gravity have shown developmental abnormalities, difficulties in fetal positioning, complications in birth. The developing fetus relies on gravity in ways we are only beginning to understand. The formation of bones, the development of the inner ear, the very process of orienting within the womb may all depend on the constant pull of Earth's gravity. On Mars, a pregnant woman would face questions with no answers. Would the fetus develop normally? Would the bones form correctly? Or would they emerge brittle and malformed? Would labour even be possible in 1/3 gravity? Or would the mechanics of birth itself become dangerously altered? And if a child were born on Mars, could they ever come to Earth? A person who develops from conception in Martian gravity may be fundamentally adapted to that environment, their heart, bones and muscles shaped by a weaker pull. To bring them to Earth might be to sentence them to a lifetime of crushing weight, a world where their own body becomes an unbearable burden. In this way, the first children of Mars may not be colonists. They may be exiles, bound forever to the only world their bodies can endure. The search for solutions has been relentless. Astronauts on the ISS exercise for 2 hours every day, strapped to treadmills and resistance machines, fighting to preserve their bone density and cardiovascular health. It helps, but it is not enough. Even with rigorous exercise, bone loss continues. Muscle atrophies. The body still deteriorates, just more slowly. Some scientists have proposed rotating habitats, massive spinning structures that create artificial gravity through centrifugal force. In theory, they could provide the constant pull that human biology requires. But building such structures on Mars is a monumental engineering challenge, one that may be decades or even centuries away. Others suggest pharmaceutical interventions, drugs that could slow bone loss or stimulate cardiovascular health. Yet no drug can replace the fundamental biological signal that gravity provides. No pill can teach your bones to stay strong when the world around you weighs so little. The gravity problem is not a single issue. It is a cascade, a chain reaction of biological failures that compound over time. Weak bones lead to fractures. Weakened hearts lead to fainting, strokes, and cardiac failure. Vision damage leads to accidents and impaired judgment. Each system depends on the others, and as gravity quietly dismantles them one by one, the entire human body becomes a fragile, failing machine in an environment it was never designed to inhabit. Mars does not kill you with violence. It kills you with patience, eroding your strength, your health, your very humanity, until you are no longer the person who arrived. You become something else, something less. And this is the gravity problem. Not that Mars pulls too weakly to hold us down, but that it pulls just enough to trap us in a slow, inevitable decline. We stand on Mars and feel lighter, freer, unburdened by Earth's heavy embrace. But that lightness is an illusion. We are not free. We are falling, slowly, endlessly, into a biological abyss that no amount of engineering or determination can escape. Mars offers us a world, but the price is written into the very fabric of physics. To live there is to accept that your body will betray you, that time and gravity, or the lack of it, will reshape you into something no longer fit for the world you left behind. In the end, Mars is not slowly killing you. It is slowly making you into something that can only survive on Mars. And once that transformation is complete, there may be no going back. As we turn our gaze back from the outer giants toward Mars, we must confront something far more insidious than gravity, something that cannot be seen, cannot be felt, and cannot be escaped. On Earth, we walk beneath an invisible shield, a magnetic embrace that has protected life for billions of years. Mars has no such guardian. The red planet stands naked before the cosmos, exposed to a relentless bombardment that makes the surface not just inhospitable, but actively hostile to human biology. This is radiation, the invisible assassin, and it may be the single greatest barrier to human colonization of Mars. Unlike the planets we have journeyed past, Mars lost its magnetic field billions of years ago. When a planet's core cools and solidifies, it can no longer generate the dynamo effect that creates a protective magnetosphere. Earth's molten iron core still churns, producing a magnetic bubble that extends tens of thousands of miles into space, deflecting charged particles from the Sun and deflecting cosmic rays from distant supernovae. This shield is so effective that we rarely think about it. Yet without it, Earth's surface would be scoured by radiation levels incompatible with complex life. Mars once had such a field. Evidence suggests that in its ancient past, when water flowed across its surface and its atmosphere was thick enough to sustain liquid oceans, Mars possessed a magnetic field strong enough to protect its early climate. But that protection failed. As the core cooled, the magnetosphere collapsed, and over millions of years, solar wind stripped away most of the Martian atmosphere. What remains today is a wisp, less than 1% the density of Earth's atmosphere, far too thin to absorb or deflect the radiation that pours down from space. The numbers are staggering. On Earth, the average person receives about 3 millisieverts of radiation per year from natural background sources, cosmic rays filtered through our atmosphere, trace amounts from rocks and soil. On the surface of Mars, a human would be exposed to approximately 250 millisieverts per year, roughly 40 to 50 times the dose we experience on Earth. To put this in perspective, that is equivalent to receiving a full-body CT scan every 5 or 6 days, continuously, without pause, for as long as you remain on the planet. But the true danger is not merely the quantity of radiation, it is the quality. Cosmic rays are not simple particles. They are high-energy protons, heavy ions, and atomic nuclei accelerated to near-light speeds by supernova explosions and other violent cosmic events. When these particles strike living tissue, they do not simply pass through. They collide with atoms, shattering molecular bonds, ionizing DNA, creating cascades of secondary particles that carve invisible tunnels of destruction through cells. Unlike the relatively low-energy radiation from medical X-rays, cosmic rays penetrate deep into the body, reaching bone marrow, internal organs, and the brain itself. Even more troubling, cosmic rays are nearly impossible to block. On Earth, our atmosphere is equivalent to about 10 meters of water in terms of shielding capacity. Mars has almost nothing. A habitat on the Martian surface, even one constructed from metal and composite materials, offers minimal protection. Aluminum, commonly used in spacecraft, can actually make the problem worse. When cosmic rays strike aluminum, they produce secondary radiation through a process called spallation, creating showers of neutrons and other particles that are sometimes more dangerous than the original cosmic ray. The only truly effective shields are mass and distance. Water is excellent because hydrogen atoms absorb and scatter radiation efficiently. Regolith, the Martian soil, also works, but you need meters of it, not centimeters. Current calculations suggest that a habitat on Mars would require at least 2 to 3 meters of packed regolith above it to reduce radiation to something approaching Earth normal levels. Some estimates suggest even more, 5 meters or deeper, especially to protect against the heaviest cosmic rays. This transforms the challenge of building on Mars from difficult to nearly impossible. Every structure must be buried or covered with thousands of tons of Martian soil. Every greenhouse, every laboratory, every living quarter becomes a bunker. Construction efforts multiply exponentially. Equipment must excavate and transport vast quantities of regolith. Structural supports must bear immense loads, and even then, colonists would still be exposed during surface activities. Every spacewalk, every repair mission, every journey between habitats. But cosmic rays are not the only threat. The Sun itself is a variable star, and periodically it erupts with solar flares and coronal mass ejections that send waves of high-energy protons racing through the solar system. On Earth, these solar particle events are largely harmless, absorbed by our magnetosphere and atmosphere, sometimes producing beautiful auroras near the poles. On Mars, they are catastrophic. During a major solar particle event, radiation levels on the Martian surface can spike to lethal doses within hours. A colonist caught outside during such an event, without immediate access to a heavily shielded storm shelter, could receive a dose high enough to cause acute radiation syndrome, nausea, vomiting, internal bleeding, immune system collapse, and death within days or weeks. Even inside a lightly shielded habitat, the dose could be severe enough to increase cancer risk dramatically or cause permanent damage to the central nervous system. Solar storms are unpredictable. While scientists can monitor the Sun for signs of increased activity, the warning time between a coronal mass ejection and its arrival at Mars can be as short as a few hours. This means that any colony on Mars would require constant vigilance, advanced forecasting systems, and immediate access to deep underground shelters at all times. No one could venture far from safety. No one could afford to be caught unprepared. The biological consequences of chronic radiation exposure extend far beyond cancer. Studies of astronauts and radiation workers on Earth have revealed a range of subtle but devastating effects. High doses of cosmic rays damage the central nervous system, leading to cognitive impairment, memory loss, and changes in mood and behavior. Experiments with mice exposed to simulated cosmic ray environments have shown accelerated neurodegeneration, reduced neural plasticity, and behaviors consistent with anxiety and impaired decision-making. In humans, these effects could manifest as difficulty concentrating, slower reaction times, or even personality changes, all critical impairments for people living in an environment where a single mistake could be fatal. Radiation also accelerates aging at the cellular level. It damages the cardiovascular system, increasing the risk of heart disease and stroke. It causes cataracts, clouding the lenses of the eyes and impairing vision. It weakens bones that are already under stress from Mars's low gravity. The cumulative effect is a population aging faster than their counterparts on Earth, burdened with medical conditions that would be difficult to treat in a resource-limited environment millions of miles from advanced hospitals. Perhaps most concerning is the genetic damage. Radiation does not only harm the individual exposed, it can alter DNA in reproductive cells, leading to mutations that could be passed on to future generations. Children born on Mars, conceived and gestated in a high radiation environment, might carry genetic changes we cannot predict. Some mutations could be benign. Others could lead to developmental disorders, increased cancer susceptibility, or subtle cognitive deficits. Over multiple generations, these changes could compound, creating a Martian population genetically distinct from humanity on Earth, not through evolution, but through accumulated damage. Even attempts to mitigate radiation through pharmaceutical interventions have proven limited. Antioxidants can reduce some of the cellular damage caused by radiation, but they cannot prevent the initial ionization events. Drugs that stimulate DNA repair mechanisms show promise in laboratory settings, but they cannot keep pace with the constant assault of cosmic rays. There is no pill that makes Mars safe. And so, we arrive at a grim realization. To colonize Mars is to accept that every moment on its surface is a slow, invisible assault on the human body. Every breath of recycled air, every meal grown in underground greenhouses, every child born in shielded nurseries would exist under the shadow of radiation. An enemy that cannot be fought, only endured. The red planet does not kill quickly, like the vacuum of space or the cold of its nights. It kills slowly, methodically, one damaged cell at a time. In the silence of the cosmos, radiation flows ceaselessly, a river of destruction invisible to human eyes. Mars stands in that current, unprotected and unforgiving. To live there is not simply to survive in a harsh environment. It is to gamble with the very structure of life itself, betting that human ingenuity can outpace the relentless decay written into our cells by particles born in the deaths of distant stars. We arrive at Mars carrying with us the assumption that atmosphere is atmosphere, that any envelope of gas surrounding a planet must offer some protection, some comfort, some familiar boundary between ourselves and the void. But Mars teaches us immediately that this assumption is dangerously naive. Its atmosphere exists in a realm of paradox, a twilight state between presence and absence. At just 0.6% the density of Earth's atmosphere, it is too thin to breathe, yet too thick to ignore. It is not a shield. It is a veil, translucent and treacherous, offering the illusion of protection while providing almost none. Standing on the surface of Mars, you would not suffocate in the way drowning feels, with panic and the desperate need for air. Instead, you would experience something more insidious. The atmospheric pressure is so low, approximately 600 pascals compared to Earth's 101,000, that your body would begin to fail in ways evolution never prepared us for. The water in your tissues would attempt to vaporize. Your lungs, even if you tried to hold your breath, could not maintain the pressure differential. Within seconds, you would lose consciousness. Within minutes, the outcome would be irreversible. The Martian atmosphere does not kill you by suffocation. It kills you by evaporation, by the physics of pressure itself. But the cruelty of Mars's atmosphere extends far beyond its thinness. Composed of 96% carbon dioxide, with trace amounts of nitrogen and argon, it creates engineering challenges that haunt every habitat design, every spacesuit blueprint, every calculation of how humans might survive on the red planet. Carbon dioxide is not merely inert like nitrogen on Earth. It is chemically reactive, corrosive to certain materials, and must be continuously filtered from any enclosed environment. The carbon dioxide levels humans exhale on Earth, around 4%, would accumulate in a Martian habitat within hours, if not constantly scrubbed away. The machinery required to maintain breathable air becomes not just important but absolutely critical. A system whose failure means death within the time it takes to finish a meal. The paradox deepens when we consider protection. On Earth, our thick atmosphere is an invisible guardian, incinerating most meteorites before they reach the surface. The friction with air molecules generates such intense heat that space rocks simply cease to exist, transformed into fleeting streaks of light we call shooting stars. On Mars, this protection barely exists. The atmosphere is thick enough to create some friction, enough to heat approaching objects, but not thick enough to destroy them. Small meteorites that would burn up harmlessly above Earth strike the Martian surface with lethal velocity. What would be a meteor shower on Earth becomes a bullet storm on Mars, with rocky fragments the size of pebbles, maintaining enough speed to puncture habitats, destroy equipment, or kill anyone unfortunate enough to be caught outside during an impact event. This creates an agonizing design problem. Habitats must be built to withstand not just the hostile environment, but continuous micro-impacts, bombardments so frequent they cannot be predicted or avoided. Every structure becomes a bunker. Every window becomes a liability. The dream of transparent domes overlooking Martian vistas crashes against the reality that transparency means vulnerability. Temperature on Mars does not merely fluctuate, it convulses. Without a thick atmosphere to trap and distribute heat, the planet experiences temperature swings that would be inconceivable on Earth. At the equator, during summer, afternoon temperatures can reach an almost pleasant 20 degrees Celsius, warm enough that a human in a sophisticated spacesuit might feel momentarily comfortable. But as the sun sets and darkness falls, that same location plummets to -80 degrees or lower. A swing of 100 degrees Celsius within a single Martian day, which lasts 24 hours and 37 minutes, just slightly longer than Earth's rotation. This violent thermal cycling places extraordinary stress on every material, every seal, every joint in any human-made structure. Metals expand and contract, plastics become brittle, seals crack. What would last decades on Earth might fail within months on Mars, not from wear, but from the relentless expansion and contraction of matter responding to temperature extremes. The Martian atmosphere cannot hold heat because there is simply not enough of it. Heat radiates into space almost as quickly as it arrives from the sun, leaving the surface exposed to the raw arithmetic of thermodynamics. Yet perhaps the most insidious aspect of Mars's atmosphere reveals itself in the dust storms. These are not storms as we understand them on Earth, with rain and lightning and the dramatic clearing that follows. Martian dust storms are clouds of fine particles, each grain smaller than a human blood cell, lifted by winds that can reach 100 kilometers per hour. While these winds sound fierce, in Mars's thin atmosphere, they exert only gentle pressure, a breeze that could barely lift a piece of paper. But they lift dust with terrifying efficiency, because the particles are so incredibly fine, so light, that even whispers of air can suspend them for months. Local dust storms on Mars are common, appearing and disappearing with the seasons. But every few years, something extraordinary happens. A local storm grows, merges with others, feeds on its own momentum, and within weeks encompasses the entire planet. The atmosphere, already thin and nearly transparent, becomes opaque. The sun disappears behind a global veil of rust-colored haze. Surface temperatures drop as sunlight is scattered and absorbed by the suspended particles. And most critically for any potential colony, solar panels become useless. The 2018 global dust storm that ended NASA's Opportunity rover mission lasted for months. The rover, powered entirely by solar panels, slowly starved of energy as dust blocked 99% of the sunlight. Even after the storm cleared, a coating of dust on the panels prevented recovery. For a human colony dependent on solar power, and Mars receives only 44% of Earth's sunlight even on clear days, such a storm would be catastrophic. Batteries could provide temporary backup, but weeks or months of near-total darkness would drain any reasonable reserve. Alternative power sources like nuclear reactors become not optional but mandatory, adding weight, complexity, and cost to every mission. The dust itself is not merely an obscuring agent, it is electrostatically charged, clinging to everything it touches with stubborn persistence. Astronauts would track it into habitats despite the most careful decontamination procedures. It would infiltrate machinery, clog filters, scratch delicate instruments, and coat solar panels even during normal conditions. Each grain of Martian dust is also potentially toxic, containing perchlorates and other chemicals harmful to human health. The atmosphere delivers this poison continuously, ensuring that the boundary between outside and inside can never be perfectly maintained. Perhaps most haunting is what the Martian atmosphere does to water. On Earth, water exists naturally in three states: ice, liquid, and vapor. We swim in it, drink it, watch it fall as rain and snow. But on Mars, liquid water is virtually impossible. The atmospheric pressure is below water's triple point, the specific combination of temperature and pressure, where all three phases can coexist. At Martian surface pressure, water ice exposed to warming does not melt. It sublimates, transforming directly from solid to gas. Any liquid water brought to the surface would immediately begin to boil, even at temperatures far below freezing, while simultaneously starting to freeze. It would exist in a chaotic state, simultaneously boiling and freezing for only moments before disappearing entirely. This means that every drop of water a colony needs must be kept under artificial pressure, enclosed in tanks and pipes that maintain Earth-like conditions. A leak in a water line on Mars does not create a puddle. It creates a brief mist of vapor that vanishes into the thin atmosphere, taking with it one of humanity's most precious resources. Water, the molecule that defines life on Earth, cannot exist naturally on the Martian surface in the form that life requires. The atmosphere of Mars is too much nothing, present enough to complicate every design, absent enough to protect nothing. It is the perfect trap, a planetary condition that seems almost deliberately calibrated to thwart human ambitions. Not hostile enough to make the challenge obvious, not accommodating enough to offer genuine advantage. It exists in a state of cruel equilibrium, reminding us that in the cosmos, the absence of something can be just as deadly as its hostile presence. On Mars, the air that isn't there will kill you just as surely as the cold, the radiation, or the dust. Perhaps more insidiously, because it appears to be something, when in truth, it is barely anything at all. After months of exposure to radiation, weakened by low gravity, breathing recycled air in confined metal chambers, colonists on Mars would face another adversary. One so small it cannot be seen with the naked eye, yet so pervasive it infiltrates every seal, every filter, every breath. Martian dust is not merely an inconvenience. It is a microscopic assassin, chemically hostile and mechanically destructive in ways that Earth's dust could never be. On Earth, we live surrounded by dust. It settles on bookshelves, drifts through sunlight, floats harmlessly in the air we breathe. Billions of years of wind and water have worn it smooth, rounded its edges, made it relatively benign. But Mars has known no oceans for eons. Its dust has never been tumbled in rivers or shaped by gentle rains. Instead, it has been fractured by impacts, ground by temperature extremes, and sculpted by solar radiation into something far more sinister. Under an electron microscope, Martian dust reveals its true nature. Each particle is jagged, angular, covered in microscopic shards like broken glass. These are not the soft grains of a desert beach. They are molecular razors, sharp enough to tear through the delicate tissues of human lungs. When inhaled, they behave like asbestos, embedding themselves deep in the respiratory system, creating inflammation, scarring, and over time, irreversible damage. Astronauts who have handled lunar dust, which shares similar properties, describe burning sensations in their noses and throats after only brief exposures. On Mars, there would be no brief exposures. There would be only constant contact. Yet the mechanical danger is only the beginning. The true horror of Martian dust lies in its chemistry. The regolith, the loose surface material that covers Mars like a toxic blanket, contains high concentrations of perchlorates, chlorine-based compounds that are devastatingly harmful to human biology. Perchlorates interfere with thyroid function, disrupting the hormones that regulate metabolism, growth, and brain development. Long-term exposure has been linked to thyroid cancer, reproductive damage, and developmental disorders in children. On Mars, perchlorates are not an isolated contaminant. They are everywhere, mixed into the soil at concentrations measuring up to 1% by weight. This is thousands of times higher than safe exposure limits established on Earth. Every time a habitat door opens, every time a rover drives past, every time construction equipment breaks ground, clouds of this chemically hostile dust would be stirred into the thin atmosphere. And once airborne, it would not settle quickly. Mars has only 1% of Earth's atmospheric pressure. Particles suspended in such thin air can drift for hours, even days, before gravity slowly pulls them back to the surface. A single construction project could create dust clouds that linger like ghosts, spreading contamination across kilometers. The dust does not merely float. It clings. Mars is a world of static electricity. Without moisture to dissipate charge, Dust particles become electrostatically activated, adhering to surfaces with surprising tenacity. They cling to spacesuits, to solar panels, to airlock seals, to every exposed surface, as if magnetized. During the Apollo missions, astronauts found lunar dust nearly impossible to remove. It stuck to their suits, contaminated their living quarters, and persisted despite vigorous brushing. One astronaut described it as having offensive properties. On Mars, where extended surface operations would be routine rather than brief excursions, this property would escalate from annoyance to catastrophe. Imagine returning to a habitat after hours of surface work. Before entering, protocols demand thorough decontamination. But no matter how carefully the suit is brushed, vacuumed, or wiped down, dust remains. It hides in fabric weaves, clings to joints and seams, embeds itself in microscopic scratches. When the airlock pressurizes, the dust that survived cleaning becomes airborne again, now inside the habitat, where it can be inhaled, ingested, absorbed through skin. Over time, the accumulation would be inevitable. Equipment would degrade. Filters would clog. Lungs would bear the burden of thousands of microscopic cuts and chemical exposures. No known filtration system can fully protect against this threat. Air filters designed for Earth environments become quickly overwhelmed by the sheer volume and persistence of Martian dust. Even the most advanced HEPA filters, capable of capturing particles as small as 0.3 microns, struggle with the electrostatic properties that cause dust to bypass standard filtration mechanisms. Engineers could design better filters, but each improvement adds weight, complexity, and points of failure, and filters must be replaced. On a colony millions of miles from Earth, every replacement filter is a precious resource that must be manufactured locally or shipped at astronomical cost. Then there are the storms. Martian dust storms are not violent in the way Earth's hurricanes are. The thin atmosphere cannot generate the same physical force, but what they lack in power, they compensate for in scale and duration. Local dust storms can expand to engulf entire regions. Some grow to planetary scale, wrapping the entire world in a rust-colored shroud that blocks out the sun for weeks or even months. In 2018, a global dust storm on Mars effectively ended the mission of the Opportunity rover, coating its solar panels and cutting off its power supply. The rover, which had operated for nearly 15 years, fell silent and never woke again. For human colonists, such storms would not merely be inconvenient. They would be existential crises. Visibility would drop to zero. Solar power would fail. Surface operations would halt entirely. Rovers and equipment left outside would be buried or damaged. The dust would find its way into every mechanical system, grinding down motors, scratching optical instruments, corroding seals. And when the storm finally passed, the labor of cleaning and repairing would begin again, an endless cycle of maintenance against an adversary that never tires. Mining operations and construction projects would make this problem exponentially worse. Building a colony requires moving vast quantities of material, excavating foundations, processing regolith for building materials, extracting water ice from beneath the surface. All of these activities would generate enormous clouds of dust in an atmosphere too thin to contain them. On Earth, water sprays and barriers can suppress construction dust. On Mars, without liquid water available and with atmospheric pressure so low, conventional dust suppression methods would be ineffective. Every dig, every excavation, every habitat expansion would send plumes of toxic, razor-sharp particles drifting across the landscape. Some scientists have proposed solutions: pressurized suits with advanced seals, magnetic systems to repel electrostatically charged particles, airlocks designed with multiple chambers, and ultraviolet sterilization zones. But each solution is theoretical, untested in Martian conditions, and adds layers of complexity to an already staggeringly complex endeavor. Even if perfect containment were achieved, which is unlikely, the sheer scale of operations required to sustain a colony would inevitably lead to breaches, failures, and exposures. The dust reminds us that Mars is not a blank canvas waiting for human presence. It is a world shaped by 4 billion years of processes entirely alien to Earth. Its surface material has been baked by radiation, frozen by extreme cold, and ground into a form that is fundamentally incompatible with human biology. We did not evolve to breathe this air, touch this soil, or live under these skies. Every moment spent on Mars would be a struggle against an environment that is, at a molecular level, hostile to life as we know it. In the silence of the Martian plains, the dust drifts. It settles on ancient craters. It swirls around the bases of towering volcanoes. It has been falling, rising, and falling again since before Earth had continents, before life crawled from the oceans. It is patient. It is everywhere. And it does not care that humanity has dreams of making Mars a second home. To the dust, we are merely another surface to cling to, another system to corrode, another intrusion to be slowly, methodically, inevitably worn away. We descend toward Mars with visions of self-sufficient colonies and thriving settlements. Yet the moment we touch the rust-colored surface, a brutal truth becomes inescapable. Mars offers almost nothing: no flowing water, no breathable air, no forests to harvest, no soil teeming with life. This is not a new frontier waiting to be settled. It is a planet that actively resists human survival at every molecular level. To build a colony here is not merely difficult. It is to attempt the impossible, creating an entire industrial civilization from dust, ice, and trace elements scattered across a barren wasteland. Consider water, the most fundamental resource for human survival. Mars does have water. Vast quantities of it lie locked within the polar ice caps, gleaming white against the red desert. Underground deposits of frozen water wait beneath the regolith, perhaps even ancient aquifers trapped in porous rock. But accessing this water requires something Mars cannot easily provide: enormous amounts of energy. On Earth, we turn a tap and water flows. On Mars, every drop must be excavated from ice, heated to melting, purified of perchlorates and toxic minerals, then transported to habitats through systems that must never freeze in temperatures that plunge to -80 degrees Fahrenheit at night. A single leak, a single system failure, and colonists could find themselves dying of thirst on a planet made partially of ice. The irony is profound. Mars holds water, but extracting it demands an infrastructure more complex than most cities on Earth possess. Yet water is merely the beginning. To sustain human life long-term, Mars colonists must grow food. Agriculture seems simple until we examine what plants actually require: sunlight, water, carbon dioxide, and crucially, nitrogen. Mars's atmosphere is 95% carbon dioxide, seemingly perfect for plant growth. But nitrogen, the element that makes up 78% of Earth's atmosphere and forms the foundation of proteins and DNA, exists on Mars in only trace amounts. There are no vast deposits of nitrogen-rich minerals easily accessible on the surface, no atmospheric abundance to harvest. Some nitrogen may exist in the soil, bound in nitrates, but extracting it requires chemical processing facilities, energy-intensive separation techniques, and mining operations on a scale that would take decades to establish. Without nitrogen, crops cannot grow. Without crops, colonists cannot eat. The dream of Martian greenhouses filled with thriving vegetables confronts the reality that the very building blocks of life are nearly absent from the planet itself. Building shelter presents an equally formidable challenge. Colonists cannot simply construct habitats from materials shipped from Earth. The cost would be astronomical, the logistics impossible. Instead, they must manufacture everything from Martian regolith, the fine, toxic dust that covers the planet's surface. In theory, this is possible. Regolith contains iron, silicon, aluminum, and other useful elements. With sufficient heat and chemical processing, it can be transformed into bricks, glass, metals, and concrete-like materials. But in practice, this requires smelting furnaces, chemical reactors, mining equipment, power generation facilities, and manufacturing infrastructure that must all function flawlessly in an environment where a single dust storm can shut down operations for weeks. On Earth, civilizations took millennia to develop these industrial processes, building upon generations of accumulated knowledge and abundant resources. On Mars, a population of a few hundred people must replicate this industrial capacity from scratch. With no margin for error and no possibility of replacement parts arriving for years. The energy required for all of this manufacturing, water extraction, and life support is staggering. Solar panels, the most obvious power source, face severe limitations on Mars. The planet receives only 43% of the sunlight that Earth does, reducing solar panel efficiency dramatically. Worse, the infamous Martian dust storms coat solar arrays in fine particles that block light and cannot be easily cleaned in near-vacuum conditions. During global dust storms, which can last for months, solar power may become nearly useless. The Mars rovers have experienced this repeatedly, forced into hibernation mode while waiting for winds to clear their panels, a gamble that sometimes fails. For a human colony, such power interruptions would be catastrophic. Heating systems would shut down, water would freeze in pipes, life support would fail. Alternative energy sources like nuclear reactors offer more reliability, but they must be transported from Earth, installed in the hostile Martian environment, and maintained by technicians who have no supply chain, no replacement parts, and no second chances. A single reactor malfunction could doom an entire settlement. Creating breathable air seems straightforward in theory. Extract carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, separate the oxygen, release the carbon. Yet this process, called electrolysis or reduction reactions, requires massive amounts of energy and produces relatively small quantities of oxygen. The MOXIE experiment aboard the Perseverance rover successfully demonstrated this technology, producing enough oxygen to sustain an astronaut for about 10 minutes after running for several hours. To supply an entire colony, dozens of these devices must operate continuously, consuming power, requiring maintenance, and depending on perfect functionality. A backup system failure during a dust storm, when solar power drops and oxygen production slows, could leave colonists slowly suffocating as CO2 levels rise inside their habitats. On Earth, we breathe without thinking. On Mars, every breath is manufactured, metered, and dependent on machines that must never stop working. Water recycling and waste management become matters of life and death. On the International Space Station, astronauts recycle approximately 90% of their water, including urine and sweat, through filtration systems that operate flawlessly in microgravity. On Mars, these systems must work even more efficiently because there is no resupply from Earth arriving every few months. Every molecule of water must be recaptured, purified, and reused indefinitely. Human waste must be processed, not merely disposed of, but transformed into fertilizer for crops, with pathogens eliminated and nutrients preserved. A single contamination event, a breakdown in the recycling system, or an unexpected illness spreading through the water supply could trigger a cascade of failures. The margin for error is not small. It is non-existent. These systems must achieve perfection, sustained across years, with repairs conducted by colonists who are simultaneously farmers, engineers, doctors, and miners, all exhausted from the relentless demands of simply staying alive. Perhaps most daunting is the scale of industrial capacity required for true self-sufficiency. To manufacture computer chips, colonists need semiconductor fabrication plants. To produce medicines, they need pharmaceutical laboratories. To repair vehicles and equipment, they need machine shops with precision tools. To generate the chemicals required for water purification, agriculture, and manufacturing, they need vast chemical processing facilities. On Earth, these industries employ millions of people, draw upon supply chains spanning continents, and rely on centuries of accumulated infrastructure. On Mars, a population of perhaps a few hundred must replicate the industrial output of a small nation, with no imports, no external support, and no access to the specialized materials that modern technology demands. Rare earth elements essential for electronics, specific alloys for high-stress components, even simple plastics derived from petroleum. All of these must somehow be synthesized or substituted, using only what Mars provides. The task is not merely difficult, it borders on the absurd. The vision of Martian colonies often imagines shining domes and thriving communities. The reality is closer to a precarious outpost clinging to survival, where every resource is scarce, every system is critical, and every day is a battle against a planet that offers almost nothing freely. To colonize Mars is not to settle a new land. It is to attempt something humanity has never achieved. Building an entire self-sustaining industrial civilization from dust and ice, powered by a distant sun, with no room for failure and no possibility of rescue. In the cold mathematics of resource availability, Mars is not a second Earth. It is a reminder that some places in the universe were never meant to sustain human life, no matter how desperately we wish otherwise. Distance on Mars is not measured in kilometers alone. It is measured in silence, in the terrible, stretching seconds between a cry for help and the moment Earth even learns something has gone wrong. On our planet, emergency services promise arrival within minutes. On Mars, help exists in a different dimension of time entirely, separated not by miles, but by the absolute speed limit of the universe itself. Light, the fastest thing in existence, takes between 4 and 24 minutes to travel from Mars to Earth, depending on where each planet sits in its endless orbital dance around the Sun. This means that every communication with home is a message sent into the past, answered by voices from the future. A colonist asking mission control for guidance must speak their question, then wait. Not seconds, not minutes, but tens of minutes for the question to arrive, be processed, and for the answer to return. In the best case scenario, when Mars and Earth are closest, A round-trip communication takes 8 minutes. In the worst case, when the planets are on opposite sides of the Sun, it takes 48 minutes. Imagine calling for help and waiting nearly an hour for someone to even acknowledge your distress. This is not a technical inconvenience. It is a fundamental restructuring of what it means to be human in crisis. Every decision must be made in isolation. Every emergency must be resolved by whoever is present. There are no experts on call, no specialist to consult, no reassuring voice from mission control guiding a panicked crew through a catastrophic failure. The colonists on Mars must be entirely self-sufficient, not by choice, but by the unyielding laws of physics. The psychological weight of this delay is profound. On Earth, we are accustomed to instant connection. We video call across continents in real time. We summon knowledge, assistance and comfort with a few taps on a screen. But on Mars, every conversation with loved ones becomes a strange, disjointed exchange. You speak into the void, then wait. Your family's reply arrives long after the moment has passed. Birthdays are celebrated alone. Crises are weathered in silence. Even a simple "I love you" becomes a message hurled across the darkness, hoping it reaches someone who remembers why you sent it. This communication lag transforms Mars into a place of absolute autonomy. Colonists cannot ask Earth how to repair a critical life support system. They must already know. They cannot request guidance during a medical emergency. They must already be trained. Every possible disaster must be anticipated. Every solution pre-programmed into the minds and databases of those who live there. Mars demands perfection because there is no safety net, no second opinion, no rescue team standing by. And communication delay is only the beginning of the isolation. More terrifying still is the supply delay. Spacecraft traveling to Mars must wait for precise orbital alignments called launch windows. These windows open only once every 26 months, when Earth and Mars are positioned favorably for the journey. Miss the window, and the mission is delayed by more than 2 years. Even when a supply ship launches during the optimal window, it takes between 6 and 9 months to reach Mars, depending on the trajectory and propulsion technology used. This means that a Mars colony cannot simply order more food, medicine, or replacement parts when supplies run low. They must predict their needs years in advance. Every ration must be calculated. Every spare component must be accounted for. A single miscalculation, a single unexpected equipment failure, and the colony faces a countdown measured not in days, but in the slow, agonizing months until the next resupply ship can possibly arrive. Consider a medical emergency. On Earth, a surgeon facing a complex procedure can consult with specialists worldwide in real time. Imaging, diagnostics, and expert advice flow instantly. On Mars, there is no consultation. If a colonist suffers internal bleeding, a ruptured appendix, a compound fracture, or any number of critical injuries, the medical team on Mars must handle it entirely alone. They must have complete surgical facilities, extensive training, and the mental fortitude to perform life-saving procedures without guidance, knowing that a single mistake cannot be corrected by calling Earth for help. Pharmaceutical supplies add another layer of fragility. Medications have expiration dates. Antibiotics degrade over time. Vaccines require refrigeration. If a bacterial infection develops resistance to the available antibiotics, or if a new medical condition emerges that requires a drug not stockpiled on Mars, colonists may simply have to endure or die, waiting for a resupply mission that is still months or years away. The same applies to every system that keeps the colony alive. Water recyclers, oxygen generators, pressure seals, solar panels. Each component is a potential point of failure. On the International Space Station, when something breaks, a replacement can be launched within weeks. On Mars, a broken recycler could mean the slow depletion of water reserves, rationing that grows stricter each day, and the grim realization that the next shipment is still 8 months away. This is not hypothetical disaster. This is the logistical reality of existing on a world where resupply is not a service, but a rare celestial event. And then there is the economic question that haunts every supply mission. What does Mars have that justifies the cost? On Earth, trade routes exist because resources flow in both directions. Ships cross oceans carrying goods that distant nations need. But Mars has nothing Earth wants. No precious metals worth the expense of interplanetary shipping. No exotic materials that cannot be synthesized or mined more cheaply closer to home. No agricultural products. No manufactured goods. No energy sources that justify the enormous cost of launching supply missions every 2 years. A single resupply mission to Mars costs hundreds of millions of dollars, possibly billions depending on the payload. To sustain a colony of even a few hundred people would require continuous investment with no economic return. Mars would be, for the foreseeable future, entirely dependent on Earth's goodwill and sustained political commitment. And history has shown us how fragile such commitments can be. Colonists on Mars would live knowing that their survival depends not on their own efforts alone, but on decisions made by governments and organizations 140 million miles away. They would live knowing that if political winds shift, if budgets are cut, if public interest wanes, the supply ships might simply stop coming. The isolation is not just physical, it is existential. To live on Mars is to live in a state of permanent vulnerability, where every day is a countdown to the next resupply, where every malfunction could cascade into catastrophe, and where help, if it comes at all, arrives not in minutes, but in the vast, uncaring stretches of interplanetary time. In the silence between worlds, the colonists would learn a new kind of loneliness. Not the loneliness of being far from home, but the loneliness of knowing that even if they scream, even if they plead, even if they send their desperate messages hurtling through space at the speed of light, the universe will swallow their words and return, only echoes from a past that no longer exists. Mars offers no safety net, only the long cold wait between one supply ship and the next. Beyond the radiation, beyond the dust and the thin atmosphere, beyond the engineering challenges and the resource scarcity, lies perhaps the most insidious threat to Mars colonization. One that cannot be shielded against, cannot be engineered away, and may be fundamentally incompatible with the human mind. The threat is Mars itself. Not as a physical place, but as a psychological prison from which there is no parole, no escape, and possibly no survival with sanity intact. Isolation is not new to humanity. We have sent explorers to the poles, sailors across empty oceans, astronauts to orbit Earth for months at a time. But Mars presents isolation of a different order entirely. A Mars colonist would be separated from Earth not just by distance, but by time itself. The planet hangs visible in Earth's sky, a faint red star that anyone can see. From Mars, Earth appears as a pale blue dot, close enough to see, close enough to remember, but utterly, completely unreachable. This is not the isolation of a submarine crew Who knows they will surface in weeks, or Antarctic researchers who count down to their relief flight. This is permanent exile with a window to home. The psychological term for this is ambiguous loss. A loved one who is neither gone nor present. A home that exists but cannot be touched. For Mars colonists, every person they have ever known, every place they have ever been, every memory of wind on their face or rain on their skin becomes a ghost, present in memory, absent in reality. And unlike explorers of the past who could at least imagine return, Mars colonists face a different arithmetic. The journey takes months. The physical toll of space travel and Mars' lower gravity may make return impossible. Their bodies may adapt so thoroughly to Mars that Earth's gravity would crush them. They are not just far from home. They are becoming something that can never go home. The live-in spaces make this worse. A Mars habitat would likely house between 6 and 20 people, depending on mission design. These same faces, day after day, month after month, year after year, possibly for the rest of their lives. The habitat itself might be no larger than a small house, its rooms divided into sleeping quarters barely bigger than closets, shared workspaces where privacy is a luxury no one can afford, and common areas where avoiding people becomes impossible. Every sound travels, every smell lingers, every habit, no matter how minor, becomes an irritation that compounds over time. Studies from Antarctic research stations provide our closest analogue, and the results are disturbing. In Antarctica, crews typically rotate every 6 to 18 months. Yet even in this relatively brief isolation, researchers document what they call the third quarter phenomenon, a period of time when depression, hostility, and interpersonal conflict peak. Sleep disturbances become common. Cognitive function measurably declines. Some individuals develop a condition called polar madness, characterized by paranoia, irrational anger, and in extreme cases, violence. And this occurs in a place where help is theoretically possible, where evacuation flights exist, where the psychological comfort of knowing you will leave provides a mental lifeline. Mars offers no such comfort. There are no evacuation flights, no rotations, no relief crews arriving on schedule. The habitat is not a temporary assignment. It is the rest of your life. The people around you are not colleagues you must tolerate for a season. They are your permanent neighbors, co-workers, and perhaps the only human voices you will ever hear again. When conflict arises, and it will, there is no stepping outside to cool down, no taking a walk to clear your head. Outside is death. The habitat is both home and cage, and the bars are made of thin metal and recycled air. But perhaps most devastating is what Mars lacks. Not what it threatens you with, but what it denies you. Every moment of life on Mars is lived in an artificial environment. The walls are manufactured. The air is filtered. The light comes from LEDs designed to approximate the sun but never quite matching its warmth. There is no weather to break the monotony, no unexpected rain to shift the mood, no clouds to watch drift overhead. The sky, when visible through a helmet visor, is always the same rust color, day after day, year after year. There are no seasons in any meaningful sense. Mars has a tilt that creates temperature variations, but you will not feel them inside your heated suit or pressurized habitat. Spring does not arrive with flowers. Autumn brings no falling leaves. Winter is not marked by snow you can touch, but by graphs showing external temperature drops. The absence of life is totalizing. No birds sing at dawn. No insects buzz through evening air. No distant animal calls echo across the landscape. Earth is not just a planet with life, it is a planet alive, constantly moving and breathing around us. Even in the quietest forest or the most remote desert, life finds a way to make itself known. On Mars, there is only silence. Not the peaceful silence of meditation, but the silence of a tomb. The only sounds are mechanical, fans whirring, filters humming, footsteps echoing on metal floors, human voices that begin to sound hollow after years of hearing nothing else. Smell, too, disappears. Earth smells like rain on concrete, like ocean salt, like pine forests and fresh bread, and 1,000 scents that orient us in space and time. On Mars, everything smells like recycled air, metal, and sterile surfaces. The olfactory richness that defines human experience is replaced by nothing. Food becomes textureless paste, carefully rationed and nutritionally optimized, but devoid of the abundance and variety that makes eating a pleasure rather than a chore. The sensory deprivation is not torture in the traditional sense. It is subtler, more insidious. It is the gradual draining away of everything that makes existence feel real. And then there is communication with Earth. A Mars colonist can send messages home. They can video call their family. But every conversation is delayed by between 4 and 24 minutes, depending on planetary positions. There is no real-time dialogue, no spontaneous laughter shared in the moment. Every exchange becomes a monologue, recorded and sent into the void, answered hours later with words that feel disconnected from the question. A child's birthday cannot be celebrated together. A parent's illness cannot be discussed in real time. Relationships deteriorate not from lack of love, but from lack of presence. Partners drift apart. Children grow up with a voice on a screen rather than a parent. Friends move on. The colonist becomes a memory to the people they love, and those people become ghosts to the colonist. Psychologists studying long-duration space missions have identified a phenomenon they call détente depression. The realization, often sudden and overwhelming, that the life you had is gone and cannot be recovered. It arrives differently for different people. For some, it is triggered by missing a wedding or a funeral. For others, it is the slow accumulation of holidays spent alone, of news from Earth that feels increasingly irrelevant, of conversations that reveal how thoroughly your old friends have moved on without you. This depression is not clinical in the traditional sense. It cannot always be treated with medication or therapy. It is existential. A recognition of loss so profound that the mind struggles to accommodate it. The question then becomes whether psychological screening and training can prevent this. Space agencies are meticulous in selecting astronauts. They test for resilience, emotional stability, social compatibility, stress tolerance. They simulate isolation and monitor responses. They build teams carefully, balancing personality types and skill sets. And yet, all of this is done with the assumption that the mission will end, that the isolation is temporary. Mars colonization removes that assumption entirely. No amount of screening can prepare someone for the psychological reality of never leaving. You cannot train someone to be content in a cage, no matter how resilient they are. Some researchers suggest that humans may simply be biologically unsuited for permanent Mars habitation. Our brains evolved in environments rich with sensory input, social complexity, and natural variety. We are adapted to Earth's rhythms, its gravity, its abundance of life. Mars offers none of this. It is not merely different, it is hostile to the fundamental architecture of human consciousness. The mind, deprived of what it evolved to process, may begin to fail in ways we cannot predict. Not through dramatic breakdowns, but through slow erosion. Motivation fades, curiosity dims. The spark that makes us human flickers in the endless monotony. The psychological abyss of Mars is not a problem to be solved with better habitats or more communication bandwidth. It is the recognition that some places in the universe are not meant for minds like ours. That to live on Mars may require not just accepting hardship, but surrendering something essential about what it means to be human. In the red desert, under a sky that never changes, surrounded by silence and sameness, the mind does not adapt. It breaks, quietly, slowly, completely. And unlike radiation damage or bone loss, there is no shielding from the slow unraveling of the self. Beyond the radiation, beyond the dust, beyond the psychological toll, there exists another barrier to Mars colonization, one that operates not in the realm of physics or biology, but in the cold mathematics of economics. It is a barrier built not of atoms or molecules, but of numbers so vast they cease to have meaning. Numbers that stretch into the hundreds of billions, perhaps trillions, vanishing into the void of space like coins dropped into an infinite well. The dream of Mars is expensive, not expensive like a space telescope or a particle collider. Expensive like attempting to rebuild civilization from scratch on the most hostile real estate in the solar system. The estimated cost of establishing even a minimal Mars colony, a fragile outpost housing perhaps a few hundred souls, ranges from $500 billion to over $1 trillion. This is not the cost of a single mission, but of decades of continuous investment. Launch after launch, habitat after habitat, life support system after life support system. Each component precision engineered, tested and retested, then hurled across 140 million miles of space, where a single failure could mean death for everyone involved. To put this in perspective, the entire Apollo program, adjusted for inflation, cost approximately $280 billion. That bought humanity 6 successful moon landings over 3 years. Mars demands 3 to 4 times that investment for a permanent presence that may never become self-sustaining. And here lies the fundamental absurdity. Mars has nothing we need. Throughout human history, colonization has been driven by resources. The Spanish crossed oceans for gold and silver. The British built empires on spices, cotton and tea. Even Antarctica, the most inhospitable place on Earth, attracts ongoing investment because of scientific value and potential mineral resources protected by international treaty. But Mars offers no precious metals worth the cost of extraction, no rare elements unavailable on Earth, no revolutionary materials waiting to transform our civilization. The red planet is, economically speaking, a desert in every sense of the word. Barren, worthless, infinitely far away. Every gram of material brought back from Mars would cost exponentially more than its value. Even if Mars possessed mountains of pure platinum, extracting and returning it to Earth would bankrupt nations. The energy required to escape Mars's gravity well, traverse interplanetary space, and safely re-enter Earth's atmosphere dwarfs any conceivable profit margin. We cannot mine Mars for profit. We cannot farm Mars for export. We cannot drill Mars for fuel that Earth needs. The economic equation does not merely fail to add up. It laughs at the attempt. No economic model exists that makes a Mars colony self-funding, let alone profitable. Every proposal for Martian economics relies on assumptions so optimistic they border on fantasy. Mars will become a tourist destination, they say, ignoring that a ticket would cost millions of dollars for a journey measured in months, with accommodations less comfortable than a submarine and a view of rust-colored rocks. Mars will manufacture goods for Earth. They claim, forgetting that anything Mars could produce, Earth can make cheaper, faster, and without the tyranny of interplanetary shipping costs. Mars will mine resources for space infrastructure, they suggest, overlooking that asteroid mining offers the same benefits without the complications of a planetary gravity well. The truth is starker. Every colonist on Mars would require millions of dollars in ongoing support costs annually. Food, water recycling systems, spare parts, medical supplies, replacement habitats, all of it manufactured on Earth, packaged for space travel, and launched across the solar system at astronomical expense. A Mars colony would not be a settlement. It would be the most expensive welfare program in human history, a permanent economic drain with no possibility of return on investment. Consider this. Earth contains regions far more habitable than Mars, yet they remain sparsely populated precisely because they offer little economic incentive. The Sahara Desert receives rainfall. The Antarctic ice sheet sits atop fresh water. The deep ocean trenches, though crushing and dark, are bathed in oxygen. Yet we have not colonized these places, not because we lack the technology, but because there is no economic reason to do so. Why would Mars, infinitely more hostile and infinitely more expensive to reach, prove any different? The Atacama Desert in Chile is the driest place on Earth, so barren that NASA uses it to test Mars rovers. You can drive there, you can breathe there, you can step outside without a spacesuit. Rescue is hours away, not months. Yet the Atacama hosts only scattered research stations and mining operations that exist solely because they extract copper, lithium, and other resources that justify the harsh conditions. Even then, workers rotate in and out. No one speaks of permanently colonizing the Atacama because everyone understands the economics make no sense. Mars is the Atacama without breathable air, without accessible water, without rescue, without resources, and without hope of profit. And yet, the narrative persists. Private companies, particularly SpaceX, have built entire business models around the dream of Mars colonization. Elon Musk speaks of cities on Mars, of millions of people living and working beneath geodesic domes, of a self-sustaining civilization that ensures humanity's survival. These are compelling visions, stories that inspire and captivate. But they are stories nonetheless. No business case exists. SpaceX's Starship development is funded not by Martian economics, but by terrestrial contracts, government funding, and satellite launches. The Mars narrative serves as marketing, as vision, as aspirational branding. It is not, and has never been, a viable business plan. This is not to diminish the technical achievements. Building a spacecraft capable of reaching Mars is extraordinary. Landing humans safely on another planet would be historic. But extraordinary achievements and economic sustainability are not the same thing. We can admire the engineering while acknowledging the financial impossibility. We can appreciate the ambition while recognizing the absurdity of the economics. The money required for Mars colonization exists, theoretically. The combined wealth of Earth's nations could fund it. But money is not limitless, and every dollar spent on Mars is a dollar not spent on Earth. $1 trillion could revolutionize renewable energy infrastructure across the planet. It could fund carbon capture technology at scales that meaningfully combat climate change. It could provide clean water, sanitation, and healthcare to every human being currently without access. It could fund pandemic preparedness that prevents the next COVID-19. It could restore ecosystems, preserve biodiversity, and develop technologies that make Earth more habitable, not less. The existential threats facing humanity are here, on this planet, in this biosphere that has nurtured life for billions of years. Climate change, nuclear proliferation, biodiversity collapse. These are not abstract future problems. They are present dangers requiring immediate investment. Sending a few hundred people to Mars does not solve these threats. It does not preserve humanity. It preserves, at best, a fragment, a genetic echo, living in tubes and dependent on Earth for survival. Meanwhile, the billions who remain face worsening conditions with fewer resources to address them because we chose to invest in a red desert 140 million miles away. Perhaps the greatest economic absurdity is this: we do not need Mars to ensure humanity's survival. We need to save Earth. We need to become the kind of civilization capable of living sustainably on the one planet we know supports life. If we cannot solve the relatively simple problems of Earth, a world with breathable air, liquid water, and abundant resources, what hope do we have of solving the infinitely more complex problems of Mars? The dream of Mars is not an economic proposition. It is a narrative, a mythology, a reflection of human restlessness and ambition. These are not worthless things. Stories matter. Dreams inspire progress. But progress requires honesty about costs, risks, and returns. And the honest assessment is clear. Mars colonization is a trillion-dollar graveyard, a monument to aspiration built on foundations of economic impossibility. In the silence of financial spreadsheets and cost projections, Mars remains what it has always been. Not a destination, but a distant hope. Not a solution, but an expensive distraction. Not a second home, but a beautiful, barren reminder that Earth, for all its flaws, is irreplaceable. Before we plant the first flag in Martian soil, before we carve the first habitat into ancient stone, we must pause at a threshold that has nothing to do with engineering or physics. This is a boundary marked not by radiation belts or gravity wells, but by questions that reach into the deepest chambers of human conscience. Mars beckons with the promise of a new beginning, yet we must ask ourselves, at what cost do we reach for this red horizon? And more importantly, should we reach for it at all? The ethical questions surrounding Mars colonization are not footnotes to the technical challenges. They are the foundation upon which every decision must rest. To ignore them is to venture into the cosmos with the same blindness that has scarred our own planet, with centuries of exploitation and short-sighted ambition. Here, in the quiet contemplation before action, we confront a minefield where every step forward demands justification, and every choice carries consequences that ripple across generations not yet born. The first ethical landmine is invisible but profound: planetary contamination. Every spacecraft, every rover, every spacesuit carries with it a microscopic cargo of Earth life. Bacteria cling to surfaces despite the most rigorous sterilization protocols. Extremophile microorganisms, survivors of Earth's harshest environments, could endure the journey and potentially thrive in pockets of Martian subsurface water or ice. If Mars harbors its own microbial life, a biology that evolved independently over billions of years, our arrival could trigger a catastrophic contamination event. we might inadvertently destroy the very evidence of alien life we traveled so far to discover. Imagine the tragedy. Humanity's greatest scientific quest, the search for life beyond Earth, could be ended not by the absence of extraterrestrial biology, but by our own carelessness. Indigenous Martian organisms, if they exist, would offer insights into the nature of life itself, answering questions about whether biology is universal or unique, whether the chemical pathways that animate Earth are inevitable or accidental. To extinguish that possibility, to forever contaminate Mars with terrestrial organisms before we fully understand what exists there naturally, would be an act of cosmic vandalism. We would become not explorers, but destroyers of knowledge that could reshape our understanding of existence. The protocols exist. The Outer Space Treaty of 1967 mandates planetary protection. But as colonization ambitions grow more aggressive, as private companies race toward Mars with timelines that prioritize speed over caution, these safeguards become increasingly difficult to enforce. The first human footprint on Mars might also be the first tombstone of Martian life, crushed beneath our boot before we ever knew it existed. Yet contamination is only the beginning of our ethical reckoning. Consider the children, not the excited children of Earth who dream of distant worlds, but the ones who might be born on Mars itself, conceived in reduced gravity, developing in an environment that fundamentally alters human biology. What right do we have to condemn a new generation to bodies that will forever be prisoners of their birthplace? A child born on Mars will never feel rain, never breathe unfiltered air, never walk under open sky without layers of protective equipment. Their bones will grow lighter, their muscles weaker, their cardiovascular system adapted to a gravity well that Earth's pull would crush. If they ever tried to return to the planet of their genetic heritage, they would find themselves in a world that feels like drowning in gravity, where their own weight becomes an unbearable burden. We would be creating a permanent underclass of Martian-born humans, physiologically exiled from Earth, living shorter lifespans in hostile environments, all because previous generations decided their existence was acceptable collateral for an experiment in interplanetary living. The ethics of reproduction in space are not abstract philosophy. They are immediate moral questions about consent, about the right to choose one's physical limitations, about whether parents have the authority to impose such profound restrictions on their offspring. Can we truly justify creating humans who will never have the option to leave their artificial habitats, to explore Earth's forests and oceans, to experience the full expression of what human biology was shaped over millions of years to be? And while we debate the colonization of Mars, Earth itself continues its descent into environmental crisis. The resources required for Mars colonization are staggering. Trillions of dollars, the collective genius of thousands of engineers and scientists, decades of focused technological development, all directed toward making a barren, toxic world marginally habitable for a tiny fraction of humanity. Meanwhile, Earth, our only confirmed habitable planet, the world that currently sustains 8 billion lives, deteriorates from neglect. Climate change accelerates. Ecosystems collapse. Biodiversity plummets. We possess a biosphere of unimaginable complexity and beauty, evolved over 4 billion years, and we are allowing it to unravel while fantasizing about desert planets. The resources spent on Mars could revolutionize renewable energy, restore degraded ecosystems, develop sustainable agricultural systems, that could feed the world without destroying it. The greatest minds working on closed-loop life support for Mars habitats could instead be solving water scarcity and food security on Earth. Mars colonization becomes, in this light, an escape fantasy, a way for the privileged to abandon a planet they help destroy rather than face the difficult work of restoration and sustainability. It echoes the darkest patterns of historical colonization, where elites extracted resources and opportunity while leaving devastation in their wake. Are we preparing to repeat these mistakes on a cosmic scale, abandoning Earth's biosphere for a sterile alternative while calling it progress? The question of governance adds another layer to this ethical labyrinth. Who owns Mars? Who decides its laws? The Outer Space Treaty declares that celestial bodies cannot be claimed by any nation, that they are the common heritage of all humankind. Yet if corporations or wealthy nations establish self-sufficient colonies, will they respect these principles? History suggests otherwise. Every frontier humanity has reached has been marked by competition, exploitation, and the emergence of power structures that benefit the strong at the expense of the weak. Will Mars become another arena for resource extraction and geopolitical competition? Will its governance be democratic or autocratic? Will Mars-born humans have rights? Or will they be subjects of Earth corporations and governments that view them as investments rather than people? The parallels to colonialism are not merely rhetorical. They are warnings etched in blood and suffering across centuries of human history. To ignore them, to assume this time will be different, is to display the kind of hubris that has led to humanity's greatest atrocities. Yet there exists a counter-argument, one that resonates with equal power. Life itself is an ethical imperative. The universe is vast, ancient, and indifferent to human existence. Earth, for all its beauty and complexity, is a single point of failure. A large asteroid impact, a supervolcanic eruption, a runaway climate feedback loop, any number of catastrophic events could end not just human civilization, but the entire experiment of terrestrial consciousness. To confine ourselves to one planet is to place all of humanity's eggs in a single fragile basket suspended in the void. Mars colonization, viewed through this lens, is not abandonment, but insurance. It is the recognition that safeguarding life itself requires redundancy, that making humanity multiplanetary increases the probability that consciousness, art, science and culture will persist beyond Earth's eventual demise. Every species that failed to adapt to changing conditions went extinct. Perhaps our adaptation is not biological but technological, our survival instinct manifesting as the drive to reach beyond our cradle world before it becomes our tomb. This perspective does not erase the ethical concerns. It merely adds weight to the other side of the scale, asking us to balance present harm against existential risk, immediate suffering against long-term survival. The minefield remains, but the path through it becomes less clear, more contested, demanding that we walk with extreme care and constant moral vigilance. In the silence of these deliberations, we confront a truth that transcends technical specifications and mission timelines. Mars colonization is not merely an engineering challenge. It is a mirror held up to humanity's values, priorities, and capacity for foresight. Every decision we make about Mars reveals who we are and what we believe we are becoming. Will we be careful stewards or reckless contaminer? Liberators of human potential or creators of new forms of suffering? saviors of life itself, or escapists fleeing the consequences of our actions. The ethical minefield has no safe path. Every step forward requires judgment, sacrifice, and the acceptance that we may be wrong. Perhaps that uncertainty is itself the answer, not to abandon the dream of Mars, but to approach it with humility, with protocols that protect both planets, with governance structures that honor human dignity, and with the recognition that the greatest frontier we face is not on another world, but within our capacity for wisdom and restraint. And so we arrive at the end of our journey through the Martian dream, not with triumph, but with understanding. Mars stands before us still, a red world spinning silently in the darkness, waiting as it has waited for billions of years. Beautiful, distant, impossible. We have travelled through each barrier that separates us from colonizing Mars. Gravity that weakens bones until they crumble. Radiation that shreds DNA with invisible fury. An atmosphere too thin to breathe, yet thick enough to carry storms that could bury entire settlements. Dust so fine it infiltrates every seal, every circuit, every lung. Resources that must be manufactured from nothing, in a place where a single failure means death. Communication delays that stretch minutes into eternities when crisis strikes. Psychological isolation that breaks minds in ways we cannot yet predict. Economic costs so staggering they dwarf the wealth of nations. And ethical questions that force us to confront who we are and what we value. These are not separate challenges. They are threads woven together into an intricate web. Solve the radiation problem, and gravity still kills you. Protect against dust, and the resource nightmare remains. Build the infrastructure, and the human mind still fractures under isolation. Mars does not offer us one mountain to climb, but an entire range, each peak revealing another behind it, stretching endlessly toward a horizon we may never reach. And yet, humanity dreams. We have always dreamed. We dreamed of crossing oceans before we understood currents. We dreamed of flight before we comprehended aerodynamics. We dreamed of walking on the moon when rockets were still exploding on launch pads. The dream of becoming a multiplanetary species burns brightly in our collective imagination, a beacon that pulls us forward even when reason suggests we turn back. But dreams must be tempered with truth. If we are truly serious about permanent colonization, not just flags and footprints, but cities and generations born under alien skies, we must speak honestly about the timeline, not decades, centuries, perhaps 100 years of technological development at minimum, perhaps longer. We must invent materials that do not yet exist, energy sources we have not yet harnessed, medical treatments we have not yet conceived. We must become a different kind of species before we can survive as Martians. Mars missions themselves remain profoundly valuable. Every rover, every sample, every data point returned expands our understanding of planetary science, geology, and the history of our solar system. Research conducted in pursuit of Mars teaches us about life's resilience, the limits of technology, and the depths of human ingenuity. But understanding Mars and colonizing Mars are different dreams entirely. One is achievable. The other may remain forever beyond our grasp. Perhaps the greatest revelation of this journey is not about Mars at all, but about Earth, this pale blue world, wrapped in breathable air and shielded by magnetic fields, abundant with water and teeming with life, is not a prison to escape. It is a miracle to protect. Every challenge we face on Mars exists precisely because Earth provides solutions we take for granted. gravity that keeps our bones strong, an atmosphere that shields us from radiation and lets us breathe freely, ecosystems that produce food without manufactured nutrients, a world that forgives our mistakes instead of punishing them with death. Mars will always be there, glowing red in our night sky, calling to the dreamers and the explorers. But perhaps the real frontier is not above us, but around us. The challenge is not to abandon Earth, but to become worthy of it. Thank you for journeying with us through the science of what stops us from colonizing Mars. If this exploration expanded your understanding, leave a like. Comment below and tell us where in the world, or perhaps beyond, you're listening from. And subscribe for more science to help you drift into sleep, armed with knowledge of the beautiful impossibilities that surround us. The dream of Mars is not dead. It is simply patient, waiting for a future we cannot yet imagine.